How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the fourth episode of the Card Table, brought to you by Competitive Cards United. I am your host, Rutuatu, and my guest for today is Kevin Barrington. He placed top four for the Fort Worth Challenge for Lorcana. Kevin, if you want to talk about your card game prowess, any accolades you have outside of the top four at Fort Worth, go ahead.
Yeah, back in the day, I used to play a lot of Magic the Gathering. I was not really at the pro level. I had a lot of second place finishes at Pro Tour qualifiers, and I top eighted regionals when you needed to top four to make it to nationals one year. So I bubbled a bunch, but I never actually broke into the pro scene in Magic back in the day.
Oh, nice. I mean, I've played a lot of Magic myself, not necessarily in the actual current. I play a little bit of Arena, but I'm just a huge fan of the drafts that happen for Magic. I think they are the most fun way to play Magic because of coming from a Yu-Gi-Oh background. I just never enjoyed the rotation format. Having to always invest in new sets and new sets, even though Yu-Gi-Oh kind of does that anyway now, where you need to new set comes out, the new archetype's insane. You need to spend $1,000 to play the best deck every 4 months. Kind of insane like that. But I love Magic drafts, and I wish that I had more friends in the area that like to do them.
Yeah, I really liked playing sealed deck and draft in Magic. I still log on to Magic Online every once in a while and play sealed with the new set for a few days, and then wait till the next set comes out just so I have a little bit of fun here and there, but I'm not really invested in the card game anymore.
Oh, nice. Was there a specific color that you really? I was always a blue player, or no, my apologies, a green player when I played draft. Was there a color that you really resonated with, regardless of the meta?
Usually I liked control style decks, so that goes with blue, but or black also for removal, but in general, whatever's good, I'll play.
Got it, got it. So firstly, I know it's been a while, but congratulations on the top four for Fort Worth. Honestly, an insanely strong accomplishment for the beginning of Lorcana. So just congratulations on that. If you want to talk about a little bit about your experience for that, because so from somebody who somebody who's watching who hasn't really, I watch the stream for Lorcana and I see people walking around. I see the games, but when you hit that day two mark and you are, you're huddled around together, there's only 64 of you, and just as that day progresses, what kind of experience is that where you are, just a couple of people, all these judges around you? What was your experience like when it comes to day twoing that event?
Oh, actually, day two is actually really interesting because when we first were brought in, we were given our deck list and we had to sort our entire deck out so they could deck check everyone at that
Mhm.
time. And then we actually surrendered our decks to the judges. So we put our deck box and deck list inside a plastic bag and gave it over to the judges, and then they did all the deck checks, and then at the beginning of each round you'd come up and your deck would be sitting there, and when you complete your match, if you're the winner, it goes back to the judges because they were doing everything they could to prevent cheating and things. So at that point, your deck was always in the side of an opponent or a judge the rest of the thing, which was very interesting because I've never seen that done in other card games. It's
Mhm.
sort of, you finish your match, you walk off, and who knows, you might get deck checked here or there,
Yeah.
but it seemed like everything was very built around making sure that there was no shenanigans going on during that time, which was very different to me.
Hey, yeah.
And in general, the 64 person at that point, it was very intense at various times just because it's like every single round was very large jumps in money. It's like you're jumping up, it's like, all right, I need to get this qualifier. This qualifier is worth unknown amounts of money. Then it's like, all right, we're now playing for a golden Mickey. And after that, it's like all the pressure was gone after that because that once you're in the top eight,
Yep.
you're playing for two boxes of cards, and you're like, "What is this? All these prizes are worth so much more." And then after that, you're playing a few rounds to win a foil set. Still, that's worth a decent amount, but it's not worth
Yeah.
anything compared to the previous thing. So it's just this big relief once you got past that round.
Do you still have your foil, Mickey? Or did you?
Yes,
Okay, nice, nice. I
I
hope to get it one day. I think Seattle is the day that's going to come for Tuatu to hit the top eight. Um, what were you? Does Magic have, or did Magic have open deck lists? Coming from a Yu-Gi-Oh standpoint, the going into top 64 and being able to see my opponent's deck list and they see mine was so weird to me because my opponent shouldn't know what I'm playing when we get to the top 64.
Yeah. At very high end events, the deck lists are open, but anything below that, it's all hidden deck lists because it is lower in competition and things.
Mhm.
But a lot of the sharing the deck lists and things increases the competition because it's sort of like, hey, I know everything my opponent can do, and now I'm going to execute my game plan the best as possible around what they have. It's not I'm just going to play, and all of a sudden, this person has this one random rogue card in their deck that comes out of nowhere and thwarts everything because, sure, it was they made a great deck building choice, but then they just win because of it. Whereas, oh, I know they have that. Let me start trying to play around that. Adds more skill to the game, I think.
So I presume then you're in favor of open deck lists.
Yes.
Okay, when I did Atlanta, my opponent showed me his top 64 deck list. I'm like, oh, I was on blue red, and he was on steel song, and I'm like, oh, freest matchup of my life. I got it in the bag, and I look at his deck list. There's like 4 Benjas. There's 3 Criminal Minds. I'm like, this is over. He goes first. He draws Home to the World. It's just done. Nothing I can do. Coming from a perspective of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like having the side deck and having tech cards for certain matchups. I really enjoy now. While some players who view the top tables are just walking around, they finish their duel, they can see what you're doing. I don't. I do enjoy having more of a mystery around. There's a blowout card that I thought of that can really snatch me victory for this win. But I think I'm slowly adjusting to enjoying open deck lists because set championships are starting to do it, and it just makes it easier all around. You don't feel like you got super sacked because you know that it's there. And if you didn't play around it, you didn't play around it. So just wanted to know what your thoughts
Yeah.
on that was because I
Yeah.
thought it was extremely interesting to me to see like, oh, my opponent just gets to see the my opponent was writing his deck list in front of me. I'm like, oh, I can see what he's playing, and then they're like, now give him your deck list. I'm like, oh no, I got the insight. Um, but yeah. So you piloted for tops for Fort Worth. You piloted Green Steel. Obviously a lot of people didn't like that deck, and they still don't like that deck with the Vegas winners. And because of that, I think the vocal minority really got to Ravensburger, and they made the Bucky errata. Now in Yu-Gi-Oh, we would have done just they would have just put on the ban list like that. First off, I don't think Bucky's a problem. I think that there were other cards in the deck that made the deck more of a problem, but Bucky was, because you could go Bucky Diablo, go -4 if your opponent didn't have an answer for it, they kind of lost. But you still lost so much card advantage if you did that, and you weren't getting so much tempo. You just discarded the card. Um, but obviously, Ravensburger listened to the vocal minority. They nerfed Bucky. They nerfed Bucky way harder than he should have been. Where he probably should have just been on a ban list if they thought it was warranted. First off, did you think Bucky needed a ban? What is if he didn't need a ban? Is there a card in the green deck that is worse than Bucky that should be banned or should be hit in some way? And then, what are your thoughts between errata'ing versus banning?
So in general, I think Bucky was a very strong card, and it caused a lot of unfun play patterns in games. But I don't know if it was entirely ban worthy. It like Emerald Steel was still not always the top deck. Like Emerald Steel had problems. There were decks that beat it. There was answers to it. And even with the next set that came out, there was even more answers added in of things that could help with Bucky in various ways.
Mhm.
So the big thing that skyrocketed Bucky being so prominent was it was very obvious that you could build this strong synergy based deck around him. And a lot of other decks really didn't feel like they had that giant 1-2 punch on the first few turns where it
Yeah.
could completely lock out a game or could quickly win a game. And thus, he kind of just was like, all right, how do we slow this deck down if possible? And they decided that that seemed like the most obvious answer because they don't want to ban Diablo because that's their big
Mhm.
legendary that's selling their cards. And that makes sense somewhat. You want to have big, splashy cards that do really cool things in your game to make it interesting. And they went overboard with their errata. In general, I think you should just ban cards because that's what I'm used to
Yeah.
in Magic. The only times you see errata are usually like, hey, we added a brand new rule to the game. Like we added these planeswalkers and we wanted these cards that used to only target players to say target player or planeswalker or various, which
Yeah.
originally with planeswalker, the rule was you do the damage to the player and then claim you want to redirect it. And then they decided that rule was really dumb. So they eventually removed that rule and just kind of errata to huge number of cards that targeted players to now target players or planeswalkers, which was a functionally we're changing these cards to work like how we wanted them to work with the rules originally, not let's just make a brand new card out of nowhere and claim it was the first card. You don't
Yeah.
really see that in card games.
Yeah, when it comes to a physical card game, when you errata a card, and then if I'm a new player and I see this 2 mana Bucky and I go to play it, like, there's so much, it's so much easier for me to figure out that's banned versus, oh, now this is this new health stat, this is this new mana cost, this is a new ability. Just seems so egregious and so much more difficult than it needed to be. Like, they could have easily, because even though they have the designs for the cards ready, they could have easily made a card in set 6 that was Bucky Jr. or Bucky with a different name, and it had the new stats, and then you didn't need to go around and print a new card for the new, the Spanish community or the Portuguese community or whatever. I mean, that was the reasoning. Like, we want our
Right.
players in other languages to know what it does, and I don't really understand that reasoning. In Yu-Gi-Oh, we actually have we have a ban list, but we have also erotic cards, but we do it in a way where it's like the card is banned for 8 years, so no one has the card anymore. And then finally they reprint it with the new errata text. So everybody who should know what the card does now knows what it does. And all new players, like, you're not buying a card from 12 years ago, you're buying a card from 6 months ago. So I think we actually kind of do it I give Konami props for once to actually finally do it the right way. Um, is there a card in the is there a card in the green? I guess I don't want to call it a green deck because you have green yellow and you have green steel, but just like the green discard strategy that you think is worse than Bucky or less interactive, or even with Bucky Band, is there a card that you think is still too egregious that the deck gets played?
Not really. I think everything's fairly fair. If there's going to be a card that becomes a problem card again, it's going to be Muses because Ward is just
Mm-hmm.
Ward itself is a problematic keyword that
Yeah,
causes things to be strong. And when you have a character that can just sit on the board and give you value without exerting, making itself vulnerable, plus the ward, it can lead to degenerate game states. And currently, Muses isn't a problem.
mm-hmm.
If Pete was a 2/3, Muses might be a huge problem.
Pete. Why can't I think? You mean the steel Pete?
Yes,
Oh yeah,
because
oh yeah. You bounce it back to your hand. That's insane.
if you could bounce Pete every single turn with Muses when you play your songs and replay them, it would be ridiculous.
I didn't even think about it. Like,
So
Pete.
yeah. So like
Yeah.
Muses just sits there going, as soon as we have a really, really problematic card that is 2 or less power that we can abuse, it's going to be really good. Which obviously there's Amber abusing it with Ariel already
Yeah.
doing crazy things, but that deck sometimes has problems because there's not enough good removal in those colors together to do things. So you don't see absolutely absurd things going on, but there are things that could happen with Muses that ends up with it needing to have something happen to it as well, just due to being hard to kill.
Yeah, I was actually about to ask what your opinion of the ward keyword was, because so Yu-Gi-Oh has what we call towers monsters. They're monsters that are unaffected by everything, but generally there's still ways to kill them, either by battle or you can non-target get rid of them. In a game like Hearthstone, the hexproof or ward keyword doesn't really mean anything because you can just attack into it. Now, I believe in Magic with hexproof. Like, is that mechanic in Magic from when you played? Was that able to be abused or be degenerate? Because when I think of, and you brought it up, where if a card has ward and is unaffected, and you have no reason to ever turn it sideways, that's when it becomes degenerate because it's still doing something. Whereas I think one of the perfect cards for ward is actually coming out in set 6. It doesn't have ward, but it's the new Yzma. And I think that card's insane for aggro because you play it, you have no cards, and you just turn it sideways, you draw 3. I think a card like that is insane with, like, actual, it makes sense to ward it because you want it to hit the board, you want it to do one turn of things, and then once it dies, you're good. So what are your thoughts on the like? Did Magic have like some degenerate like wards or hexproof strategy or
Yeah. In general, yeah, hexproof was a keyword in Magic. In general, it wasn't overpowered because the cards that were put on, like in general, they didn't have static abilities that were affecting the
yeah
game. They were good characters or creatures that you'd attack with, and then they'd be in combat, so you'd have to be careful when you're attacking or doing things. And a character on its own, if it doesn't have a static ability affecting the world, isn't doing anything. It's just
yeah
there. So there were a lot of things that happen in Magic is you have these instants that, or kind of like quick effects from
yep
Yu-Gi-Oh, where you like your opponent tries to kill your character and you play a card to give it hexproof until end of turn, so you can like stop their effect from doing things, and various stuff like that were used a lot. But in general, it's not, there weren't unkillable threats on the board. Pretty much anything that's going to be a big problem for the game was also targetable, so that there were answers for it. And it
okay
pretty much good card design, I think, is where of choosing where
yeah.
hexproof is used and not used.
And I think Ravensburger will be. Hopefully, they understand the issue with that keyword, and just that later down the line it goes, and if they keep printing cards with that keyword, it's just gonna become a lot worse. As the sets come out. Um,
Also, Magic also has a lot cheaper and more efficient board wipes and other type abilities, so that even if there was something that you couldn't target, there are ways to remove it very cheaply and efficiently from just giving everything -2/-2 or blowing everything up. There's a lot in Lorcana, you have Be Prepared. It's at 7,
yeah,
whereas the equivalent in Magic's at 4.
yeah.
So there's a bigger gap of when people can start interacting with your warded characters.
I brought this up on my first episode. Do you think they're eventually, because we have Under the Sea and we have Be Prepared? Do you presume, or do you think that they're eventually going to print cards for every color that are some form of removal for like mass removal? Like I was thinking, like you have a blue card that's sitting together that throws everything to the inkwell, or like a purple card which probably should have been Under the Sea, but like maybe it bounces everything to the hand, and then each player draws a card for every card. Or do you think they're eventually gonna come out with that, or do you think that removal is going to be straight just for these specific colors?
I think as long as they keep it within the color pie of what that color does, it's perfectly fine. So the blue one makes perfect sense. I'm not sure if purple really does bouncing of the opponent's characters in any way, so I
Yeah,
couldn't really, I don't think that purple or amber are going to end up with any sort of solid removal like that. There could be some amber based one that destroys all characters with 5 or greater
yeah,
power or something like that, because that's part of amber's identity, with Minnie Mouse and World's Greatest Criminal Mind being the two targets that do that currently. But I don't think they're going to significantly go against their current color pie until deep into the game, where they start experimenting with branching out and giving other colors minor effects,
yeah.
that minor versions of what other colors are known for.
Ooh, dual color guards and colorless guards. Here we come. um, So, when we talk about, we're in set 5, we're actually only a month away from set 6, which is insane to me. Like, I'm used to the standard TCG format of every 3 months, but man, these Lorcana 3 months feels like they just sweep by, like within, it's a couple of days. It just feels like you're in the next set already.
Oh,
But yeah, when it comes to set
our,
4s, oh, what's up? Go ahead.
Yeah, part of that now is because we have a month of set
Yeah.
championships. So it's like you get the new set, you play for a month, you go to a DLC or something and play with it, and then all of a sudden you're in set champs, and then you have a new set.
Yeah. And then the set champs happen, and then the DLC comes out like the week after, and you can't even use the new set, so you have to. Yeah, it feels pretty weird. But so we look at deck archetypes, right? We had set 4 where the most popular decks probably for set 4 were you had red purple or ruby amethyst, you had steel green, you had ruby sapphire, you had sapphire steel as the counter to steel green. I think that there was like a triangle format kind of where it was like red purple lost to steel green, but red purple beat blue steel, and then blue steel beat steel green. I actually kind of like those formats. But like those were like the 4 most popular decks. And then set 5 came out, and it felt like nothing really changed, right? Like, yeah, lemon lime kind of got a little bit of a little bit of a boost, but they kind of do the exact same thing as they did in set 4. Clarabelle came out, but it feels like no green deck is actually playing it. Blue green kind of fell on its face. I think somebody made it big and it just didn't happen. And then just every deck that was good just got better, with the exception of blue steel, but that might come back with green still popping back up. But so the things I've noticed where it's set 1 through set 5 is that just fewer cards are played in decks. So when we think of a Yu-Gi-Oh set, a set comes out, a new archetype comes out where you're gonna build it's the new hotness, right? And you're gonna build an entire deck using those cards. But when you talk about a new Lorcana set, it feels like maybe 1 to 2 cards per color get slotted into new decks. I guess, what are your thoughts on what we saw from set 4 to set 5? Between the best decks, and just what are your thoughts on? And we talked about it before the show, but just your thoughts on set rotation and what would happen and all that.
So, coming from a Magic background, this is kind of similar where they don't want a ton of power creep, so they're trying to introduce new things slowly, and that character stat lines aren't getting significantly stronger. So you have some new effects here and there, and a lot of times you just go through and you're like, all right, cool. These are the established decks, and those decks, the players of those decks go, I think these cards will be useful for me, and they start pulling it in. And you have less people going, how am I going to build a brand new deck and come up with something great? And those people, those innovators are able to do things. And every once in a while, there's some really cool card that comes out and you can build a brand new deck around it, which we really haven't seen anything
Yeah.
huge like that yet in Lorcana. Maybe Mufasa was something where people thought, hey, cool, we can do something maybe really cool with this, but in general, it just gets slotted into decks. But it kind of had a little resurgence of Blurple because it was able to do some extra things there. And actually, the only big breakout new deck, as you said, was Sapphire Emerald, which didn't really go very far, other than the fact that 65th place at Vegas was a Sapphire Emerald deck that missed based off tiebreakers
Yeah.
to make the cut. And it looks interesting. It looks cool. It might actually be a very solid deck. It's just nobody knows much about it because decks they haven't performed well enough, and it's partially because not many deck lists are being shared around
Yep.
and not many people are playing it. So until someone playing it does great with it, it just flies under the radar and no one knows it's there.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually like that. Don't get me wrong, I hate simulators. I never played Dueling Book. I never played Pixelborn. But as much as Pixelborn did great for the game and allowed for more testing, I actually like. It feels like we're going back in time for card games where it's nobody necessarily knows what the best deck is, and with such a high variance in Lorcana, any deck can be the best deck if you build it correctly. It's such a shame. It is definitely a shame for green blue. I actually played a little bit of that deck, and you just get insta wiped by blue red. So if they ever nerf any red guards, I think that deck could be really good. I actually really enjoy the lack of information at the moment.
Yeah.
It makes
yeah. I think the Sapphire Emerald deck, the builders of it said that their version is good against Ruby Sapphire.
Oh,
So,
really? Okay.
yeah, it's a very interesting build. Lots of ramp and lots of big characters.
I'll have to check it out. The deck I was playing it had a lot more balance aspects in it, like the Mother Gothel package and You're Welcome, but you never want to give them their red cards back because they just blow up the field again. So I'll definitely have to check it out because it's a very fun. I like control matchups, and I control deck and green. I play green Magic, blue and Magic is the same, or blue and Lorcana is kind of the same thing. So really excited to try that out. I'll check out his deck list. So you went to Vegas. I went to Toronto. Do you just want to talk? I guess I can give my thoughts about Toronto first. So I went to Toronto and I played Steel Song. I've been habitually, control player. I played blue steel and I played blue red. For the set championship, for set 3 set champs, I played a little bit of green purple aggro and I hated it. I hate vomiting your head on the board all the time, and then you were on a top deck war. And it kind of felt the same way with Steel Song, where if you didn't open up a whole new world, it just felt really bad. But I just got cooked. I was done by round 4. I went 1-3 real quick. I lied. I got 4 ties right in a row. And I just couldn't do anything. And I think if I had stuck with red blue, maybe something changes. But overall, I think the event was good. You're stuck on. It was actually really interesting because it was the Bucky list. it was the Bucky list meta, but it was still set 4. So you got to see a lot more creativity where nobody's playing green steel. So you're seeing a lot more control. You're seeing a lot more Steel Song, and Red Purple came back. That was the main reason why I brought Steel Song to the event, because Red Purple was going to be everywhere. And I think it won it. I think it won the event, or no, Lemon Lime won the event if I remember correct. The one Forbidden Mountains guy lost, but yeah, I overall love the DLC challenges. What happened for you talked with me about your Vegas experience. How was your how did you play?
So I wasn't super confident going into Vegas. My playtest group, we were testing a bunch of decks, but I ended up on red blue, and the problem was though I'd go to my locals and what like I'd 2-1 all day because we do best of 3 there, and I was like, sure, I'm 2-1ing against these people. These
Yeah,
people are good. It's not like I'm 2-1ing up against a bunch of just absolutely terrible players or anything, which would tell me that there's something really wrong here. But still, I was going in going, I'm going 1-1 all day is how I felt. Like whoever was on the play had a slight advantage no matter what
yeah.
matchup I was in. And that's pretty much how the event went. There's a few 2-0s I got in there. There's this one game against Steel Song where I finally got board control and he was at 19 lore. And of course, he doesn't have flutes anymore because flutes are not
Yeah.
in many of the builds. I have a Madame Medusa and like a million ink out because I have a Great Stone Dragon that's been going off for a while. And there is a turn that he top decked Big Cindy
Oh
and
man.
played out Big Cindy, which my answers to that are Maleficent and Be Prepared. And my turn starts out with play Popsicle, Quest with Hiram. Play Popsicle, play Hiram. Sit there staring at my ink and play Vision of the Future. And nope, none of those. At that point, there was nothing I could do. That like if I had found a Be Prepared off that, I still could have inked and played Be Prepared that turn because we were late enough in the game with enough ink. But it was just we're digging and nope, we're not going to find one of the answers. And that closed out that game, ending in a 1-1 because of that.
Damn.
But a lot of games where it just felt like I was 1-1ing a lot. I made it to round 7 before my dreams were crushed where I couldn't make it to day 2. I played against Ruby, Amber, Mufasa
Ooh,
with
yeah.
like it was like hyper aggro version where it had 4 Daisy, 4 Piglet, where he just curve out and drop a Mufasa and just it is
Can't
not a
play.
deck that you want to play with
Yeah.
Ruby Sapphire.
I
It's just
definitely
like
definitely hate
cool.
that matchup. So I'm still on the fence when it comes to 2 game versus 3 game when it comes to Swiss stages, Swiss stage at the beginning of it. Um, at first I hated 2 game format. I'm like best of 3 is so much better. But then it's like if you're on the play, you're winning those best of 3s like 80% of the time. Obviously made up statistic. We saw the pixel board stats from like set 3 where it's like a 55% win rate or something like that. Um, but then I'm like, there needs to be a side deck in some way. But I also think a side deck kind of kills the game a bit. But like, so I'm back on set 2 is the best option, but it still just sucks. What are your thoughts between best of 2 versus best of 3?
I strongly would prefer a 3-game format just because that feels good. Have it coming away from a match knowing if you
Yeah.
won or lost. With that said, I have no negativity against the 2-game format. In the 5 DLCs we've played so far, or we've had in the North America, obviously we've had some overseas as well. But just looking at things, you see the same names day twoing over and over and over again. Zach Bivens has day twoed, I believe, every single North American one, and he missed barely over in Europe once. There is no way to say the 2-game format doesn't work if the same players aren't all doing it. I mean, Zach Bivens was #1 Swiss twice.
Yep.
There is a consistency that top players are making out of the format that proves it works whether or not it feels good to play.
I think, while I agree, I do just want to rebuttal on that. I think it's a little bit different. So I presume when it comes to Magic as well as Yu-Gi-Oh, if I go to a YCS, and which is a DLC variant of Lorcana for Yu-Gi-Oh, I would say when it comes to top 64, about 80% of the players I recognize. Not just because I've been in the community for a while, but like I've seen them topping YCS after YCS after YCS. However, when I see, and I mean, even though we've only had 5, and sometimes you can't go to all of them, you know, the ticket sales are the biggest pain in the ass ever. Um, I would say it's like 15%. You see, like the same 15% of players. So I do think that there is, and we'll talk about variance later on. But like, I do think that the high variance does constitute towards that, as well as the best of 2 versus best of 3. Um, so I think if we were in potentially best of 3, you might see a lot more names constantly topping than you will with best of 2, or just lesser variance game. So that's just my rebuttal. I think that there could be a lot more. It could reward better players a lot more.
Possible, but I still feel like there's at least a very high number of people who've top
Yeah,
or day two, at least 2 of them, which when there's been 5, 2 out of 5 is still a very good record when you
definitely,
look at percentage-wise the number of people in the event.
definitely, yeah. So talk about Vegas, and we'll kind of talk about both Vegas and Birmingham the same way. I actually have this set up where if I go right over here, so Vegas was extremely blue-red dominated, and we knew that because coming out of set 4, set 5 was all about Sisu being insane, even though Sisu wasn't even it was in set 4 already, but people weren't playing it. Um, and just being able to clear boards against these aggro decks was very strong. You saw these Steel Song decks playing Bare Necessity, like going extremely heavy into Bare Necessities. So now your Beat Repairs are more monster removal versus these spell removals. And just the ramp engine, the ramp the ramp engine combined with the removal plus the draw power and blue red, kind of like the deck did everything. Plus the end game with Lucky Diamond Tamatoa. So looking at top 64 of Vegas, blue red just took the world by storm. However, in the top 4 of Vegas, green steel actually just was 3 out of 4 of the top spots, and I think a lot of people were very. They didn't think Green Steel would be good. I don't think anybody actually saw it coming that this deck would be extremely strong, where it was just the Bucky deck. It moved a little bit more into discard. You changed out the Buckies for Prince Johns, and then you added like morphs to it, and that was the change to the deck. So and actually, I have the deck list for that up. Is there anything? Firstly, if you want to talk about what Green Steel, firstly, did you expect Green Steel to be such a strong deck in this event? And then did you think? What are your thoughts on this deck list?
So, in general, like a week before the event, I was looking at green steel. I knew that it was strong. I knew that turn 3 shifting Diablo plus play Pete was like one of the strongest play lines you could do in the format just because it gave you a free turn of Diablo stays on the board so you get at least 2 draws off your Diablo. If you have more Petes to back it up or other things, you can just do absurd things. And the problem was I did not have enough confidence on Emerald Steel into Ruby Sapphire to believe that it should have been looked at. So I didn't actually do enough testing into the deck to or to go in there because I was expecting a lot of Ruby Sapphire and I didn't really look at Emerald Steel and go, oh, it beats all the other decks, so why not just play it? Other than it might have it has a weird matchup into Ruby Amethyst, but it can still win there.
Yeah.
So, but because I mean, I played Emerald Steel the previous set. I know what it can do. I know where its power is. There's so many games where you don't have Bucky, and
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, now that you aren't running Bucky, you don't have to play the bad cards that you played just because you played Bucky.
Yep.
So you're playing better cards in general. I'm not 100% sold on the Prince John version of the deck, but there's a lot of very powerful things that Emerald Steel can do, and it's always going to be a strong presence.
What are your thoughts on the Anna card? So when this card got released, I myself and a lot of people just really hated this card. It felt like it shouldn't have been uninkable because the stats are really weak and like it quests for 2 okay, and it's basically a 5 mana card where it feels like Green Steel has difficulties kind of getting to that 5 mana point to then use it. So the first, if I recall, the top deck list played 2 Anna, and then the second place deck list played 4 Anna. What are your thoughts on this card? I'm back and forth on it.
Anna is absolutely bonkers.
Okay.
The fact that you have a card that lets you do 3 different things when you play it in a game where almost all of our cards do a single thing right now is amazing. I the other day I was playing it in League, and I used all 3 modes throughout various different games, or sometimes it's like, "Alright, the discard's what we're using right now." Sometimes I need that extra 2 power out of nowhere as a surprise, and then the being able to just kill a damaged character is, like, amazing against so many things that Emerald Steel has problems getting rid of, like, swing your Ursula into a Tamatoa and then blow it up.
Yeah, or just
Just
sing a
things
song.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sing a song.
And also the fact that Anna has 2 power and you can use muses to rebuy her and then do other shenanigans is just amazing. It's one of the most versatile cards in the deck, and it really lets you maximize your play patterns.
I do think that one of the reasons like I was off on this card, and a lot of people other and a lot of people were, was that because they thought Steel Green was like kind of dead, was or just wasn't as strong, that then it wouldn't see play in that deck. Whereas like if you look at green Amethyst and green Yellow, like the effects don't really do too much. But in green Steel, all the effects definitely have their uses. So just want to get your thoughts on that card. I am now a believer in Anna. She's a great card. I do think she could. I will say I do think I think it's an exception that she's so strong in steel, like that kind of steel matchup. But like, I think she could be an inkable card. I don't think she needed to be uninkable.
I think that she also should be played in the Emerald Amber deck because they
Oh
run
really?
muses as well,
Oh
and
yeah,
all 3 modes are good. Like, the thing that makes her over the top is that you have muses. If you don't have muses, her value drops a lot, and she's just kind of, all right, cool. She has 3 options. We'll use her for value here or there, but being able to rebuy her just is insane.
yeah. I do think I will say it's been like I've been seeing uses be played for like a month now, and I still forget that card can bounce your own cards. It's like I will never remember that card can do that. I lost an entire round at league because of it, and I will never live it down. Um, but speaking of Vegas, looking at Birmingham, so us in America, there was a very high green steel population that was winning the event, whereas in Birmingham, similarly to that graph we saw where blue red was so strong and so represented, blue red actually won Birmingham, and it feels like a lot more of their players were on that deck than here. Do you think there's a difference? So I'll give you an example. So in Yu-Gi-Oh right now, there's a plant archetype called Rika, where literally this it actually just got second at the most recent YCS like last weekend in Europe, and this deck always shows up in Europe as like the best deck, even though the deck itself never shows up well in America. It's like never in top 64. It's never good. But in Europe, this card wins events left and right. It's always topping. It's insane. Do you think that there is just a player difference in how we think between European players?
I wouldn't really say there's a player difference. It's just overall different decks were decided to be brought to the tournament. I think that Emerald Steel was very easy to miss right now, so the fact that it didn't show up as much over there might be that the playtest groups there didn't come upon it, or they just felt like what they were working with was good enough or did very well. One thing that I've noticed on players is all the top Magic the Gathering pros, like a lot of the Hall of Famers in the US, I've never seen them at Lorcana events. I haven't seen them topping events that really. I mean, Zan is a low end Magic person. It's not like he's not like a household name in Magic.
Yeah.
Various other like yes, there are Magic people that were good at Magic that are doing well, but there aren't like these household names that everybody knows. But when you go and look at the European challenges, there are tons of Hall of Famer Magic players making day 2 and top 16ing and things, and it feels like over there, I think the level of player might be higher than we have in the US, just that there's a lot of people that are high-end players of a lot of card games that are playing there, whereas here, I think we've had a lot more people move over from Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah.
And Pokemon and those things, which obviously those are also very accredited card games, and pros in them are very good as well. I think Magic is the card game that is closest in mechanics to Lorcana out of
Yeah.
the ones, and thus those players probably have a lot more experience and a lot more mathematical background behind, hey, we're doing these for these reasons.
Yeah, literally. However, whenever somebody asks me what Lorcana is, I just say it's Magic, and there's no instance in it. Like, if you don't know how to play Magic, you're good to go. Just remove every instant from the game, and you can only do something on your turn. I can only do something on my turn. Yeah. So yeah, obviously, very interesting hearing your thoughts on that. I do think that there is a potentially like a mental difference. Like, you know, maybe we think more of like an aggro strategy versus Europeans having more a control strategy. But also your thoughts on the Magic Bros, I agree with. Where I, even though I don't know these household names, when I see them in events, I'm sure that we would know that they're a strong Magic player. They would obviously let us know that. So, you know, obviously you top four Fort Worth, didn't do the best at Vegas. I top 64 Atlanta. I didn't do too well in Toronto at all. I personally think that Lorcana as a game has a lot of flaws, right? You know, obviously we're in a game where certain matchups, you know, have 80-20 matchups versus other decks. And I think that, you know, as more cards come out or if a sideboard gets introduced or a rotation format comes out, we could see a decrease in that percentage where it's like, oh, now all of a sudden purple red has a 50 a 40-60 rather than a 20-80 versus green steel or something like that. So just what are your thoughts on the variance between both deck disparity and just how the game is played, where, you know, there are some like, I mean, there are just some times where it's luck of the draw, and that's obviously just how card games work. But in a lot of other card games, such as Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh, there's a lot more control in how that luck happens. Whereas in Lore kind of feels like you can just rip it off. Like if I'm gonna top deck goat, I'm top decking goat. You know what I mean? It's like that. What are your thoughts on the variance in the game?
Overall, I think deck-wise on matchups, it's similar to what I've used to in Magic, where there are some decks where you know, hey, if I play against this deck, I'm going to get clobbered.
Hmm.
Where you know, and a lot of a lot of the choices are, I think these decks are going to show up at this tournament, and I'm going to bring this deck because I think it's going to have the best overall matchup for the meta that we're going to run into. And sometimes you guess that wrong and you end up having a really, really bad day. Sometimes you guess it pretty well and you end up hitting all your matchups you expect. And there's also deck choices of, if you want to play Ruby Amethyst, go for it. You're going to have about, your worst matchups usually are about 40%. Your best matchups are probably about 60%. You're a very middle of the road deck. You can beat everything, and all your games are going to be very skill based at times, and it's going to feel good. Or play hyper aggro and crush every single Ruby Sapphire player
Yeah,
you ever see and some other stuff. But know that if you run into Steel Song or other steel based decks, you're probably going to get crushed. And there's a decision there of, do I want to have a bunch of very close matchups, or do I want to have a deck where I feel like I get as many free 2-0s as possible and then have to fight for my life if I run into the wrong deck? And that sort of gives you a variety of choices of what are you willing to go with and what do you want to do for a tournament.
got it, got
And
it.
then within the game itself, a lot of the luck, I think, is similar to other games where it's making a lot of good decisions to make sure you're in the best possible position to top deck. Top decking a goat to win, well, 4 turns earlier, did you decide to lure with a character instead of
Yeah.
challenge in some spot to get you to that point where you can actually get to the point that you can actually win the game? In the top four of Dallas in my game one, there was a variety of turns where I was just pushing lure and forcing the board state to where if my opponent be prepared, I could then follow up with Tinkerbell, which because of known deck lists, I knew there was no way he could kill the Tinkerbell without just playing be prepared again. So then I'd immediately get 2 lore off of it and could develop the board more, forcing another be prepared or
Yeah.
something, and then work my way to getting to that 20 where sure, maybe I top deck a card along the way that make it a little easier, but all my decisions leading up to it was, let's make sure that these cards give me a win and not play to survive. Because if you're playing to survive, you're going to limit the number of cards that actually let you win the game sometimes because you're more treading water and then losing instead of leaving yourself the out of a goat or whatever big card's going to be there.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's things that can go awry, like at League Night the other day, I saw my opponent's hand with an Ursula. They had 2 cards and they had nothing going on, and they drew a Rapunzel and were able to challenge in Rapunzel to draw 3 cards. Off of that, Thing, grab your swords to wipe
Oh
my
man.
board. And it's just sort of like, all right, I thought this game was good. And all of a sudden, I lost my entire board and
It's over.
they developed a bunch of stuff. And it happens. But also, they might have been setting up as best as possible to get there to do things like that. Other than I know they inked 2 Rapunzels that game, so they're down to 2. So
Yeah.
on that, but still, a grab your swords off the top would have hurt me a lot. But just the double draw 3 grab your swords was enough to push things over. So things can happen either way, whether they're fully set up entirely. But in general, if you make good decisions earlier, you can set yourself up for looking to get lucky to win games.
You mentioned so when I talked about the variance when it comes to deck matchups, you talked about Magic also having those issues. Do you think that a sideboard in Lorcana is should happen at some point? Just because I think when it comes to Magic and or even I mean Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't necessarily have like those 80-20 matchups. It's just kind of like you compare opening hands. But like in Magic, if you have like an 80-20 matchup in Magic, you obviously side better to deal with those matchups. Do you think a sideboard in Lorcana should happen, or do you think people should just we're seeing decks hit like 62, 63 cards, so people can add cards for different matchups that are hard for them? Do you think a sideboard should come in?
So that's a weird question. Being from a Magic background, I love sideboards. I
Yeah.
love the idea of it. There are a lot of cards in Lorcana that I think would make great use to be in a sideboard where you'd never like. I can't think of the name of it. It's the steel card Triton something. It's
Oh, Triton's Decree.
uninkable. Try its decree. That card would have been a 4 of in every sideboard during set four
Bucky.
for
Yeah.
Bucky if sideboards existed. But since they don't, that card is absolute garbage that nobody ever wants to look at because it's uninkable.
Yeah.
So there are cards that clearly point towards I think a sideboard would be great. With that said, because we aren't Magic and we don't have to put 20 like
Yep.
a third of our deck are lands, that third of your deck could be inkable solutions to problems. So your deck already can be built to be more robust against the field if you want to, though currently a large amount of it is just make more do what your deck likes to do better. But various decks end up at about 50 cards, and then they have about 10 flex slots where you decide how you want to build out your deck to deal with various different matchups right now.
Yeah. I agree. I'm still on the fence as to if I think a sideboard should happen, because I do think that there are a lot of cards in the game currently that one of the big things that like there was a I think it was a blue red item list. It was like 30 items that it topped an event, like a top 64 or 101 or something like that, and it played like the poison apple combo, and it's like you get that back and you just blow up their princesses. Like that's a great side deck card. I mean, there's just so many. There's that new Sword of Truth that kills a dragon, or the one Prince Philip or something like that. Like there are so many good side deck cards. I just don't know if it's worth having those in the game yet, because I think it could make the like that 80-20 then become way too much more one sided, because there aren't enough cards you need to side yet, so you can just all in on one matchup and just hammer it home then, and then that 2-0 they were hoping for is now a 1-1, and they just get screwed in points. Yeah, I'm on the fence at the moment for sideboarding, but still definitely something to look at. Let's really get on to some of the. Actually, before we get on to this topic, I want to talk about Seattle. So I will be going to Seattle. You said I don't. Did you say you were going to Seattle, or I forget? You're not going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not doing Seattle. I'm just kind of chilling, waiting, practicing for, or getting ready to
Oh
practice
yeah,
a bunch
Continentals.
for Continentals.
So when it comes to Seattle, which I hope the top 8, that'd be awesome. So obviously we saw the Rise of Green Steel, and we also have the Set 5 championships. And we'll obviously talk about the championships in just a bit. But what do you expect to change between Vegas and Seattle? Obviously, I think what people are seeing is the Rise of Green Steel, and they will see counters to that. But then obviously it's just that mind game of, will you see more counters to Green Steel, and then you bring more decks that maybe you lost to Green Steel in the first place. What do you think we'll see when it comes to Seattle?
So my playtest group's been looking at a lot of different things right now. We've been looking at Emerald Steel. I've been pushing building Emerald Steel in a different way, which is closer to what I ran in Dallas, which makes it where Sapphire Steel's more of a free matchup for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that because we expect Sapphire Steel is going to go up because it's going to be the counter to Emerald
Yep.
Steel. So if we build Emerald Steel in a way that it beats the mirror and beats Sapphire Steel, then we might be positioned really well. The problem then is making those changes positions us poorly against Ruby Sapphire and uh, Ruby Amethyst.
Hmm.
Essentially, by shoring the deck up to make steel decks not a problem, hurts our Ruby game plan. So a lot of it's deciding what is going to show up there. What decks do we think are going to be the most common decks that we're going to run into? And do we want to go with one of these plans with Emerald Steel? Or do we want to try to build a deck that we think is going to be good enough to beat Emerald Steel, Sapphire Steel, and then still have a good matchup against Ruby Amethyst
Yeah.
and Ruby Sapphire?
I apologize. I forgot your build from Texas, from Fort Worth. Was there and don't you have to reveal all your secrets? But like, was there a tech card? What was a tech card that you played for set 4 Fort Worth that was good for that made you have a stronger matchup versus Sapphire Steel or the mirror match?
The main thing is I just played big characters,
Okay,
lots of characters. I my deck, the goal was to cut all the junk out of the deck that you don't want to top deck late. And just every single turn, once you hit mid game, is play a 5 cost or bigger character for the rest of the game.
got it.
And Sapphire Steel just runs out of answers.
Hmm.
At some point they're just out of removal and you're just questing away, and they can't close the game out fast enough, and they just run out of gas. Like, there was a player that played 3 Tinkerbells and 3 Grab Your Swords against me in a game, and still
Oh wow.
it didn't feel like the game was close.
That's pretty good. Looks like you really built your deck accordingly then, and looks like you it seems like you got some good matchups then for to then those tech cards really came in handy. Um, so one of the most argumentative points I have when it comes to we have set championships coming up, and I absolutely love the aspect of the set championships because we don't have Yu-Gi-Oh has their local level, they have their regional level, which is a like for example, you just had a Philadelphia regional, it was like 600 people, so it's like in that middle ground between a local and a DLC, and then we have our YCSs, which is a DLC level, and then obviously nationals and whatever after that. I really like the set championships. I wish they were larger person events, but I love the aspect of them. I love the prize cards. I love the money that can be made from the prize cards. Obviously, everybody loves that. All the Yu-Gi-Oh players love that. And now with the introduction of the new, kit that Ravensburger introduced, where now top 8 gets the new Mirabelle. I am so against this happening. I think that it should stick to top 4. Whether they have brought out 4 more cards for top 8, where it was like a non-foil version of the Mirabelle. It just honestly, it feels to me like a participation trophy at the end of the day, where it's like top 8ing a 16-man locals is like you can do that with a blindfold on. Just what are your thoughts on just the I guess you could say the increase in pricing, but really these cards are going to be worth like $50 or $40. They're going to be great for collectors, and nobody actually wants them.
So I think the change is fantastic because at the local level, like, these small tournaments are per store. There's tons of them going on, and there's a lot of players they're decent local players that they compete against the people that are winning DLCs all the time. And you go and you see the same 10, 15 people playing in every single store through the entire thing. And these other people that they don't care as much because they're a little bit more casual, but they go to their local store and maybe one other store that's near their house, and they get clobbered.
Hmm.
And they like their league night, and I feel like they should have it. Like, sometimes they top 8, but they usually rarely make it to top 4 in these.
Yeah.
And I think it is good to have these more casual players getting some sort of prizing out of these, because these were meant to be sort of a store level tournament. And by also having the prizes so diluted, I think your the big players that are just going to 8 set championships in a season are going to stop going to as
Yep.
many. They're going to go their store that's local to them, and they're not going to show up and stomp a bunch of other stores as well just to get these cards and sell them off. And thus, I think it's better for the community and better for building uh, Lorcana as a whole, because more people are going to get the cards and more people are going to feel like, hey, cool, I went to an event and I got something cool out of it that's more than my normal league night.
If you couldn't tell, I was really hoping you would agree with me on that one. Do you think that? So obviously, and I'm in agreement where because and I know tons of people because I mean my local car shop does. I do not. I go to like maybe 4 out of the 8, and I hope that I maybe won two or something. I think I won two or those 2 stitches or whatever. But like obviously there are groups of people that come and they stop everybody. But do you think that because of the I'm gonna say it's a lower attendance for set championships for set 5 because those people who are coming to stores aren't actually gonna be showing up anymore? Do you think that that will water down the results for us moving into Seattle and what we think is good? Like, do you think that what's gonna top these like what store like when stores or people post on Reddit or on Facebook or whatever that what's the website called, the Lorcana deck builder, um what's that
I
called?
know I
The,
don't
the
know.
one the
There's
one
a
that you
few
put your
different.
the one you put your deck list on. What was it? Dreamboard.
Uh,
Dreamboard.
all right, yeah.
Do you think that the pool of good decks is gonna get diluted and nobody's gonna know what's necessarily good coming to Seattle?
I think that's a very good point that you're going to have less concrete information out of this season than other ones because there's going to be less top players hitting each other all the time. But I mean, that means playtest groups are more important
Yep,
for figuring out what you're going to be doing.
definitely. Now we have two fun topics to talk about. One is the very fun controversial topic about Pete's game referee. So if for people who don't know, the big thing that was going on Reddit and Facebook and Discord I would say the past couple weeks is I would say it's a ruling with Pete's game referee where when it's played, you as the player need to remind your opponent or at least vocalize your opponent that they cannot activate spells or sorceries or what are they called? Actions. They cannot activate actions that turn. um, yeah, I play 5 different card games. You can tell. And and if you don't, you misrepresent the game state. So I am a big proponent of if my opponent misplays, if I misplay, it's on me, it's on them. If I lay it on Pete's referee and you don't read the card, even if I say I'm playing, it's not an effect that I need to vocalize or I need to tell you it's going to happen. I also don't need to remind you on your turn that you can't do this thing. Now there's things going on where people say the card should fizzle if my opponent attempts to play strike a good match and they can't. It should go to the discard pile. That's not how it works. But like, I am a big proponent of getting information because my opponent misplayed. Whereas if they play Be Prepared on 7, now I know they have Be Prepared. It just goes back to their hand. I'm a big fan of noticing what cards do, and it's up to my opponent to if they don't know what my card does to read my card. It's a 55-minute fucking round, right? You have tons of time in a best of 2 format. That's just how I think. What do you think on this card? Do you think that I should have to like coddle my opponent or babysit my opponent to know what they're doing?
So there's a lot of debate over this card, but how it actually works is you don't have to say anything about it when you play it. The only time you have to do something is when your opponent would play an action. If you don't remind them immediately when they play that action, saying, "Hey, I played Pete last turn. You can't do that," then and then it will go back to their hand. But if you don't remind them at that point and you let them
Yeah,
resolve that action, at that point it's considered a missed trigger, and essentially you've missed it at this point. They can play as many actions as they want because the first one slid through. And that is how it's ruled on judging at this point
okay,
because there's a lot of back and forth, and then there was a clarification because it was escalated to Ravensburger's rules guy, and he came down and said, all right, this is how we're going to be handling triggers, and this is what the comprehensive rules mean, because there was a lot of interpretation differences because uh, the NA judges were interpreting the rules of the game state being misrepresented or
yep,
essentially as, hey, the opponent doesn't know it and makes decisions based off of not knowing it, and thus the game state's been affected immediately because they made those decisions based off of thinking they could play an action.
yep.
Whereas the actual interpretation of game state being affected is the first time that effect itself would not be would not work properly because it was missed or something.
I'm actually
I'm
glad that you brought that up because I had no idea that they solved that issue. I thought we were still in an
Yeah,
ongoing thing where people still didn't know what was going on.
yeah. So I'm a member of there's this Discord Lorcana rulebook hub that's run by one of the DLC judges, and there's a large number of judge staff in there, as well as various other people that just do judges for their local events and things. And I'm one of the rules advisors in there because I like being really on top of the rules
Yep.
and coming up with crazy rules questions. And thus, that Discord's kind of there for clarifying rules, helping players know what the rules are, and having interesting challenges. I I come up with all these rules questions. We've asked a few different things, but a lot of them start with, so I have a Mufasa out and
Yeah.
my opponent attacks in and kills my Mufasa, and I flip a Prince Naveen off the top of my deck, and then I play this song on my opponent's turn, and then what happens with this, or something like that, where you just all sorts of craziness happens that normally doesn't happen in Lorcana.
One of the wonkiest rules I remember reading like 2 sets ago was like, and I just couldn't believe it works this way. Was like the whole, if you crash like Robin Hood into a Mufasa, and the Mufasa spawns a Maleficent Dragon, and Maleficent Dragon kills the Robin Hood, I get to draw a card. Like,
Yep.
what?
Yep.
Let me tell you, Yu-Gi-Oh, I would have kicked you out of the tournament if you were saying that shit's working. But that is insane. That like the comprehensive rules is so different. And it could be like in Magic, I know you guys have the stack where things can constantly get added. But
Yeah.
because we have the bag where things resolve one at a time type of thing, yeah, it's just really interesting how that works out. So I'm glad that you were able to give me the. And if you want to if you could send me the Discord link, I will post it on the video so that people know to check it out. And
Yep.
lastly, the last point, because I love Reddit, I have had a very love-hate relationship with the community, every community I'm a part of. Not necessarily I'm a bad guy, but like I just dislike the stigma from different communities. So, and this is affecting you as well. But like I remember your post came out. You posted on Reddit that this is my top 4 Fort Worth profile, and here's my matchup, and you spent like probably like an entire day talking about the tournament report. And I think that post had like 8 upvotes and like 3 comments. I don't like. I mean, Reddit is definitely not a competitive hub, I would say. And would you agree?
Yeah. Most of the people there are more casual, yes.
Yeah, and this wasn't really like a question we were talking about, but like I think there are I think Reddit just needs to have more, because I think that with set championships being more, as you said, store level, people should be excited about the competitive aspect of the game, and there should be more interaction towards that competitive aspect. I just wanted to bring that up as Reddit's a fun place to talk about competitive things. But yeah, that was what I got for the card table today. I actually really appreciate you coming on, Kevin. It was very fun having you. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? Is there any topic that I didn't hit in the past like 20 topics that we talked about?
I think we're good. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you at Continentals. Let me tell you that.
Yep.
I haven't
Good
read
luck getting there.
yeah, I haven't read anything about these last chance qualifiers, but we'll see what happens there. So good luck if I don't see you there, but I hope to see you there. And thank you again for coming on. Have a wonderful night, guys.